Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Renee Hiatt. I'm joining you for the second part of this tip series that's featuring my Kentucky Rose Garden quilt, which you can find that kit and pattern online at our AQS quilt shop. We are going to talk about in this series the proper way to get those fabulous precision points that are needed for this block. Both the blocks require you to have a good 1/4 inch and properly stitch and then properly press. So in this video, we are going to talk to you about how to find your 1/4 inch and then how to go about stitching that properly, which requires you to pin. I know a lot of you don't like to pin, but it really, really makes a difference, especially on an 8-pointed star or a wedge block like we have here. To get these points, you got to take the time to do it. So let's talk about finding your 1/4 inch. So the very first thing you need to find is a good 1/4 inch tool. And that's a tool that's going to measure your 1/4 inch. I personally love this sewing machine seam guide. They literally are under $3. They are totally worth it. They have many different holes in them for the different seam allowances you may do. So for a 1/4 inch is the one I utilize the most. It's the very first hole that comes off of the measurement, and it does say 1/4 inch. They also have the 3/8, the 1/2 inch, the 5/8. So whether or not you're making bags or clothing, this works terrific. There's a couple other tools on the market. One of them is the Quilter's Magic Wand. This is a good marking tool, but it also has that center line, which you could put under your needle and find the 1/4 inch. I personally prefer the sewing machine guide one because of the holes. So let me show you how it works. I'm going to take the sewing machine guide and line it up so that the needle will go in that 1/4 inch hole. So I'm going to gently bring down my needle and find that hole. And when I do that, I want to be able to drop my foot and see that my 1/4 inch foot is lined up with the edge of that tool. I happen to sew with a guide, and if you do too, you would want that guide to rest right next to that tool. If it doesn't, you want to really move your needle. Us quilters don't do well by utilizing the lines on the sewing machine bed. We're much more accurate if we can line our fabric up with the edge of a foot and know that the needle is going to hit that 1/4 inch. All right, so mine is perfect. If it wasn't, I would want to bring up my foot and I would want to bring up my needle. All right, and when I do that, I could then utilize the proper buttons on your sewing machine to move your needle to meet that your needle will go in the hole and that your foot will go on the edge. So in other words, if you had space between this and your needle, you would want to move your needle to the right. If your guide or foot was landing on top of the guide, you would want to move your needle to the left to make sure that it lined up perfect. All right, really simple tool, very inexpensive, something every quilter should have. All right, now that I know my 1/4 inch is there, I have a couple different types of pieces that I'm going to show you. So one of the things that my Kentucky Rose Garden pattern utilizes is a basic wedge star, which means it's made up of 8 wedges. You need to sew those together. So you really want to always make sure you are lining them up and preparing them to be sewn. And then you're going to see it as it should be in the block, flip it, and then line it up. I'm going to line up the shapes so that they're occupying the same space. And then it is time to stitch it. I personally like to bring my needle down. I do have a hover on this machine that I can slide in my piece, and then I can start to stitch. All right. I'm going to hold my ends and then go ahead and stitch through. And you want to make sure that you're keeping these nice and lined up. Take your time, it's not a race. All right, So that's the simplest of piecing. Next, I have some wedges that have to come together. These are diamond wedges. This is used in my 8-pointed star. Of course, I've pressed properly to get here so that my pieces will nest, and I will tell you whenever possible, try and ensure that your pieces that are coming together are pressed in the opposite direction so that they will nest. So I'm going to see it, flip it. Now this will nest, right? So I'm going to make sure that that has nested. I personally like to pin it. I'd rather pin now than rip later. So I throw a pin in there. I highly recommend that you pin on your fabric and not out from your fabric. I'm then going to take the time to line up my point. And the secret to getting an 8-pointed star is to make sure that you are keeping your fabrics lined up nice and neat. So you'll notice here that I've pinned with it back from my 1/4 inch stitching line. And that is so I don't have to remove that pin, nor am I going to run it over. We never want to run over pins. It can mess up the timing on our machine. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and start stitching this and come on in with my best 1/4 inch, making sure that I'm keeping that fabric right up against that foot. All right, you don't want to shove it up against so it rolls up, but you don't want to space either. All right, when I get this close, I'm comfortable removing that pin, and then I'm going to go ahead and stitch on through. All right, and we're going to talk about the pressing of these units in the next tip video, but basically you're going to end up making and pressing open your half wedges, right? So your half octagons, I should say. So we're bringing in our wedges. This has 2 different sets of wedges, so I went ahead and made them all the same. And then I'm taking half of them and turning them around. Now, to make this happen, which we really need this to be a perfect center, as I showed you at the beginning, we want to see it and flip it. Now for this, I'm going to come over here and do some fancy precision pinning. All right, so the first thing you want to do is find the V. If you did not put a 1/4 inch here, this V is not going to be a 1/4 inch back. All right, so you're going to check that on both of yours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin in where that V hits. That is going to be where my sub point is coming in here. I'm then going to place that into this one, all right, so that they're matched up together. I like to take it to the edge and kind of line it up. I want to utilize the pin with my fingers to keep that straight up and down. And that ensures that I've kept this properly lined up. Now, before I stick in my sub pinning, I want to take and nest my other points that need to line up. So I've lined this up. I'm going to come in and pin it. I'm going to line up this point and come in and pin it. And you'll notice I'm keeping the pins on the fabric. Once I have this edge lined up, I'm going to keep this pin straight, and I'm going to come in here with 2 pins. And I'm going to grab those pressed open seams. All right, and take this pin out, and then this is ready for stitching. So I would start up here, come on through, and then stitch through that V and come on out, utilizing my 1/4 inch. All right, so now let's go ahead and stitch this with our best 1/4 inch. All right, so we're going to make sure that we're lining up our edges. All right, and come on through. And then remember what I said about the pins, right? So I'm just coming up as close as I can get, and then I am going to remove the pin. I'm going to come on in. I'm going to check that when that went over that little bump, that it didn't give me a twisted sister, that everything is still lying flat. And I'm gonna come on in, and I can kind of see where that little V is, and my needle is lining up to it perfect. I can remove those 2 pins, and I can come on through. All right, and I'm gonna continue stitching to that next pin, and then I'm gonna stitch on through. All right, and so I'll just give you a little peekaboo. We're gonna talk about pressing it in the next tip video, but you can see what a beautiful job that did. It really lined up everything perfect. We're going to wrap up this tip video as we've talked about how to find your 1/4 inch, how to properly pin and stitch. Our next video in this series is going to talk about how to properly press things. All right, we'll see you then.